Welcome to our podcast. This is Friends on Fire.
I'm Mike. I'm a lifelong devotee of financial independence. I even wrote a book about it.
And I'm Maggie, a newer convert, but just as passionate, especially on the intersection of minimalism and financial independence.
We're one and the same.
We are two like-minded friends who believe that talking about money with your friends and family opens the door to financial well-being.
The Friends on Fire podcast is about dispelling myths, building financial acumen, and sharing your financial independence journey with the people you care about.
This is Friends on Fire.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Maggie.
Hi, Diana.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Diana. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you on. So we will dig in to a bunch of different topics with Diana, but I first just want to give a little bit of background so that our listeners know who we are talking to today. So today we've got Diana Merriam, who is the founder of the Economy Conference, which has a unique spelling. I'll put that in the show notes.
There's quite a few of those in this space. A lot of FIs, a lot of economies. Yeah. It's kind of a thing.
A lot of play on words. Yeah. It's a very clever name, by the way. And the Economy Conference is an event that she created and ideated and launched that is an event centered around financial independence. The Economy has been described as a party about money, as well as the TED Talks of the FIRE movement. I love those descriptions, by the way. She's also the host of a popular podcast called Optimal Finance Daily, which has over 300,000 downloads per week, where she narrates articles from the best personal finance blogs on the planet. I would highly recommend people listening to it. It's a nice short 10 to 15 minute read. That's a great way to start your day or inspire some good financial behavior. After getting out of $30,000 of debt in 11 months, she used her newfound financial freedom to negotiate a remote working arrangement with her employer, and then took off a 2-month sabbatical to walk 500 miles across northern Spain on the Camino de Santiago trail, which is a pretty popular pilgrimage and trail, and then also launch her own business, which is related to the Economy Conference. Diana, before we jump in, is there anything else you want to share about yourself in the way of introduction?
I think you covered it. That was a great intro.
Okay.
But you do want to introduce your new kittens that you just got, right?
Oh my gosh.
What are their names?
Okay, so quickly, I'll tell you this story. I woke up on December 3rd, not knowing I would be a cat mom. I have a dog, Buddy, who's an 85-pound lab shepherd mix, and I was taking him for a walk, and I heard some cries over by a dumpster, and it turned out to be these 2 adorable tuxedo kittens. They were 9 weeks old when I found them, and I was planning to just kind of drop them off, at a shelter or try to find a home for them, because I had no intention of being a cat mom, right? But I just fell in love with them within like the first hour. And one of my friends, one of my oldest friends, we were friends in college, and we had adopted a cat together that he ended up keeping. And he reminded me that we adopted that cat together on December 3rd, which was the same day that I found these 2 perfect kittens. And I just thought that's a sign from the universe that these are my cats.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I've had them, a month and a half now, and they are just absolutely perfect. Like I love them so much. I'm so happy I found them.
What does your dog think of them?
He was not happy at first. So it took us about 2 weeks to integrate them, for him to like get the lesson that they are not to be attacked. So we had to keep them separate and kind of socialize them a bit over the course of 2 weeks, but they're fine now. They're not best friends, but they coexist happily and they found a happy medium.
It's still early, they might strike up a stronger friendship over time.
I hope so.
I think the dog is likely to become friends, and the cats will probably take 10 to 15 years to warm up to the dog.
It's actually the opposite. They are very curious about him, and they're so young that they don't have fear yet. Mm-hmm. And so they'll kind of go up to him and be curious, and they try to play with his tail when he's wagging his tail and stuff. And he tolerates it, but they haven't, they'll go to him more than he'll go to them. Yeah.
It's funny you say that they're so young that they don't have fear yet. That's a great observation. Also, I'm going to use that as a segue to turn over to Mike to our favorite question. Speaking of being young.
So we like to start all of our interviews asking about your childhood, because we think that these stories are very interesting about how you grew up and how that influenced your life. So can you tell us a little bit about how you were raised financially and how you think that impacted your current views on money?
Sure. So I was raised, my mom was the breadwinner. She was an RN and my dad was a stay-at-home dad. Unfortunately, my dad passed away when I was 2 from a heart attack, very young. He was 42 years old. And so my mom was left, as a widow with 2 babies that she had to take care of, and she was the breadwinner. She really instilled in me to never, ever let a man take care of you. And I think that was based on the way she was raised. Like my grandpa had evolved, later in life to kind of not have the same position. But when she was young, he didn't want her to go to college. He wanted her to find a nice man and get married and be a homemaker. That was just kind of the generation that she was raised in. And she very much pushed it against that. She did not agree with that at all. And it did cause some family tension, but it kind of, she was a little bit rebellious in that way. By the time her younger sister was college age, because her younger sister was 4 years younger than her, my grandpa had come around by that point and saw the light that, women are not just made to stay at home. But she very much instilled that in me that, you have to be independent. You have to make your own money. You have to have your own career. And I think that fierce independence really influenced me. I was surrounded by powerful women growing up. My mom was the breadwinner. When I went to school, I was always a straight A student. I went to college on a full academic scholarship and graduated college with a 4.0, surrounded by females. So this idea that as a woman that you're somehow disadvantaged or, the boys are smarter was not a message that I ever got growing up. Even in my professional career, I've always worked for women. I've always worked for female-led organizations. And it wasn't until fairly recently that I ever felt disadvantaged for being a woman. I think that's a big part of my story. We're coming up 2 days away right now from my 1-year anniversary of quitting my job. And a big reason why I quit was due to discrimination. And I had never in my life experienced discrimination before. In that blatant way. I'm sure there's probably microaggressions if I really think about it, but that was like a very interesting experience because it just conflicts so much with the way I was raised.
It's so interesting, just your comment about, there's a lot to unpack in there, but just your comment about being surrounded by powerful women growing up and never really having any messages up until, being an adult more recently, where you felt any sort of, discrimination or different treatment or, microaggressions, like you said, for being a woman. I can definitely relate because I've always felt like just very thankful and appreciative that, my dad growing up never treated me any different because I was a girl. I mean, he taught me to do, all these building and DIY stuff that he knew how to do.
Mm-hmm.
No one ever told me I could do anything different than my brother or anyone else in the world. And I think, those messages you get, aside from the financial messages, those messages you get growing up are so critical to, who you grow up to become and just, that fierce independence.
Yeah. And I do think in one sense, I very much benefited from that, right? In that I've been able to lead a very independent life, but there is a downside to it too. Like my mom instilled in me, never, ever let a man take care of you. And so when it comes to, I'm kind of battling some of that conditioning now when it comes to me and my partner, we're budgeting together. We are sharing resources. We're building a life together. And my fierce independence it becomes a challenge when you're trying to partner with someone, because sometimes it does make sense where, maybe I take a step back and he focuses more on his career while I focus on other areas of our life, that kind of thing. My conditioning doesn't allow that. I have to 100% always contribute 50% to the household and never have any flexibility in that in my rigid upbringing. And so, I would say it's in the grand scheme of things, it's probably a net positive, but there are some downsides to fierce independence.
Yeah. Well, and even some of what you just said is just the idea of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, right? So, you can have a growth mindset and recognize that you have these thoughts and these limiting beliefs and everything else, but that you can grow and get past them, and having that confidence, I think, is interesting.
So one quick follow-up question. which we would never, I don't think, get to in this interview, but I think it is related. Maggie and I have talked about managing finances separately versus combined when you're in a serious relationship or when you're married. Based on your upbringing and your attitudes about money now, what camp do you fall into?
I think it's a combo. So the way that we are managing our finances is that we opened a joint checking account that we each contribute the same amount every month. I developed a budget based on our fixed costs and some estimates on what our discretionary budget should be. This is fairly new. So my boyfriend moved in. We've been together 3.5 years, but he didn't move in with me until like 6 weeks ago. And so we are fairly new in this process and kind of figuring it out. But there's the joint finances, right, of paying for the household stuff, paying the mortgage, all that kind of stuff. So we have a joint checking account for that. And then we have a credit card where I'm an authorized user. We opened it in his name because he's like a clean slate when it comes to credit card churning, which is amazing for me. So I'm like, open this card and make me an authorized user. And like, this is so
that
fun.
what attracted you to him? You were you found that out. You were like
blood for credit card churning. So anyway, we have one credit card that we both spend on for joint expenses. And then I am reviewing that and kind of comparing it to the budget I created and reporting back to him on how we're doing as far as spending. And then we're going to be working on that, just like budgeting and joint expenses for about 6 months. And then from there, we're going to start on some mutual savings goals. So like we have a wedding date. So we're going to be saving for a wedding. We're going to be saving for, a few other things that we want to save for. And so the way that we see it working is joint accounts for our joint expenses. We each will be handling our own retirement funding. So like, he is fully funding. He has a simple IRA through work. He has his Roth IRA. He doesn't have access to an HSA, but he is fully funding that. And I'm fully funding my options separately. And then we probably eventually will get into, again, those mutual savings goals where we still have separate bank accounts. We still have separate assets. We're not actually married yet, but we are talking about the prenup and estate planning and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but I would say we have joint accounts and we have separate accounts. I don't think we will ever fully combine all of it, but that's mostly because, we met in our 30s. So we have like very established assets outside of our partnership.
It's funny. My husband and I, this is our second marriage, so also met in our later 30s, and we're fairly established. We though we would say separate finances, we do the same thing you do, right? We have joint accounts. We have we talk about everything. We track everything together. And so it's funny. I think sometimes people who hear separate finances, which is kind of how I would describe ours, it's not really separate. There's high transparency, high communication, joint savings goals, joint, everything else. And Mike probably noticed it, but when you said prenup, I was smiling really big because prenups have they just get a lot of flack. I know heavily pro prenup.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not anti-prenup.
Oh, no, I don't think you're anti-prenup at all. There are a lot of people out there who are anti-prenup and think that it's.
I get it that it's a touchy thing, but from my perspective, I got to watch him go through a divorce. When we met, he was going through a divorce, and I got to watch how he treated his ex, and he was super generous, way more than I would be.
Yeah,
right.
Mine was too.
Right. So I feel like the prenup, even though my assets are about double his at this point, he's setting up a trust to protect his son, protect his assets for his son. I think when there's kids involved, it becomes more necessary for a prenup when I have a business that I want to protect, and the reality is if 50% of marriages end in divorce, it's like saying, well, I don't need car insurance because I don't anticipate getting in a car accident. Well, no, I don't think half of those people who get divorced anticipate that, right? To me, it's just an insurance policy. We don't have any intention of getting divorced. We're still betting on ourselves, but we also, I think, have the humility to know that things change and we don't know everything. And so, it makes sense to have an insurance policy.
I think you said that incredibly well. And the other piece I would add about prenups and also just estate planning and wills and everything else is the conversations you have to have with somebody for all of those, especially because we're both divorced with kids too. the conversations, it's a whole nother level of complexity where he's trying to protect his son, but also make sure that it's fair to you and everything else.
Yeah.
The conversations you have to have with someone, they're like next level discussions. And you think you have financial discussions just, being in a relationship with someone, but preparing for those documents, you have to go through all these what if scenarios and be able to have a mature discussion with your partner about what would be fair to happen in this scenario. And then what would happen in this scenario. And if you can't have those discussions, you probably shouldn't be getting married to somebody.
Oh, 100%. Right? Yeah. I mean, if there was any weirdness or hesitancy I get that money is a taboo for most people, but like the person you marry. So I take this so seriously. I have never been married before. I'm going to get married at 36 years old for the first and hopefully last time. And to me, like the person that you marry, I heard a lawyer say this, it is legally the most significant thing you will ever do aside from dying. It is a serious thing. Right. And people take it so lightly, like, oh, I'm in love. I want to get married. I don't think being in love is a good enough reason to get married. I think it's about partnership. It is a business transaction and it should be treated accordingly. Like we have the love side of our relationship and then we have the paperwork that we're working through to become life partners. Those are two very different things.
It's funny you say it's like a business transaction because I think my wife would complain that sometimes I am way too businessy with her. She's like, you need to leave your office life at the office.
Funny. Tell her to listen to this podcast and be like, Diana said we can keep this as a business relationship. Yep. I think that her point was you have to have both, right?
Yeah.
I also just the observation that he just moved in 6 weeks ago. I was like, oh, you got these new kittens. You got a new man living here. It's just a lot of changes.
We went from a house of 2, me and my dog, to a house of 6 because now we've got, Brad's son. We've got the 2 kittens. I mean, it's amazing. I absolutely love it. It's going very well. I'm in the honeymoon stage for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So moving on and kind of taking a step back, you told us a bit about your childhood. And I actually think it's really fascinating to dig into your relationship and some of the kind of financial and business or financial and emotional aspects of that. So I think your broader money story is fascinating. I've heard it before. I would love for you to share it with our listeners because I just think it's incredibly approachable to the average person of some of the things that you went through. So I would love for you to share with us just kind of that story and what prompted you to get your finances in better shape.
Absolutely. So I would say that my 20s were marked by being completely financially illiterate. I was just kind of gallivanting around New York City, swiping that credit card and not really paying attention. And I think one of the reasons why is because growing up, I had the influence that income was the main thing that mattered when it came to money. If you had a high income, then you were set. And so I spent my 20s climbing the corporate ladder and I had this goal in my head to reach a 6-figure salary before 30 years old. And I did that, but I realized probably around 28 that income is only a small portion of the equation. It's an important portion of the equation, but what matters so much more than income is the gap between your income and your expenses and the way you manage that gap. And so I didn't know anything about that. At 28 years old, I found myself 30 grand in debt for literally no reason. Half of it was credit card debt and half of it was student loan debt, which 15 grand of student loan debt is like nothing compared to most people. But I got a full academic scholarship to college. I should have had no student loan debt. But of course, at 18 years old, when people are offering you loans for living expenses, you're just like, oh, okay, everybody else is taking it. Why not? And so that's kind of where my student loan debt came from. But I discovered the Mr. Money Mustache blog in the fall of 2015. And I had never heard anyone talk about money the way that Pete does. And it just, I like to describe finding this blog like a refreshing punch in the face because it like totally blew my mind. It helped me realize how much I was wasting my privilege because I had a great career. I was climbing the ladder. I think at the time I was making around 80 grand a year, which isn't that great for New York City, but I didn't have any dependents. It was workable. And so I, devoured this blog. I ended up getting out of 30 grand of debt in 11 months. And then from there, I started saving about 60% of my income. And during this whole process, my income was climbing. I got like three 20 to 25% raises 3 years in a row during this kind of time in my life. And so I got myself to the 60% savings rate. And I would say part of the motivation for me to figure out my finances is that I had this goal to go walk the Camino for my 30th birthday. And this was a seed that was planted in my early 20s by a very adventurous aunt that I have, who she walked the Camino when she was in her 40s. She suggested it to me. I was actually going to go with my aunt and uncle because my uncle had planned to do it for his 70th birthday, which was the same year as my 30th birthday. This was 2017. And so around 28 years old, I basically realized if I'm going to go take this trip and take 2 months away, I got to get my money in order. Like I got to get out of debt and I got to save some money because in my mind, I would have to quit my job. I had no concept of a sabbatical. I had no examples of anyone successfully negotiating a sabbatical. So in my mind, I would have to quit. And so I thought, I got to have a big pool of money to help me kind of bridge this gap and figure out my life after the Camino. What ended up happening is that I was able to negotiate the sabbatical. It was unpaid for 2 months. But it was also around the time that I negotiated my remote working arrangement. And so I moved from New York City to Cincinnati, going from $1,800 a month for this cockroach infested apartment in the bowels of Brooklyn to a $600 mortgage in the most beautiful house I've ever lived in good old Cincinnati. So, I mean, it's been an incredible journey. And I feel that getting my finances in order has just opened up a world of opportunity for me that was inconceivable when I was 30 grand in debt.
So maybe we could dig in a little bit into the tactics you took to get your finances in order. So you mentioned a 60% savings rate. I would imagine that when you first started, you were at a 6% savings rate or maybe a 0% or negative savings rate.
Yeah.
What did you do to build yourself up to from where you started up to 60%?
Yeah. So naturally, it's just reducing my expenses for the most part, right? And the first thing I did is build a lot of awareness around where my money was going. So I started tracking every single dollar I spent. And I was horrified to realize that I was spending like $2,000 to $3,000 a month going out partying. I was a party animal in my 20s. Like I had my 20s in New York City, right? And so I never really had that big of a problem with like buying clothes and shopping like that. I've always hated shopping. I think that's like, I'm so grateful that I've always hated shopping because I think that helps a lot in the spending department, but I loved partying. And so I was going out to dinner every night. I was drinking constantly with my friends and work colleagues and happy hours. And, you know, it was a fun time, but I didn't have a lot to show for it. And so when I realized how much money I was wasting on that, what I needed to do was figure out what is the value underneath the spending and what is a more resourceful way to get that value. And so the value is that I love spending time with my friends. I'm an extremely extroverted person. And so how do I spend time with my friends and party in a more resourceful way? And what I ended up doing is I made my apartment more fun than a bar. So I would host these elaborate dinner parties. I would have people come. I would cook the food. I could cook for 8 people for like $30. I got really good at like making good food. And then everyone would bring the booze and we would just party in my apartment. And I would invent all these games. It was an amazing time. I also would host clothing exchanges with my friends. Even though buying clothing wasn't that big of a pain point for me, it was just fun. So like all of my friends were much more fashionable than me. Everyone would clean out their closet, come to my apartment for an afternoon of like mimosas and music, and we'd all try on each other's clothes. And I would walk away with a closet full of free fashionable clothes for my friends. So I think that tapping into creativity and resourcefulness allowed me to get my needs met in ways that weren't expensive, and it brought my expenses down a lot. I also think that I had to really work on my mentality. because I think that we are conditioned since birth to be consumers. We are conditioned to desire luxury. And so I needed to really question that and almost rewire my brain to have more appreciation for the abundance I already have in my life versus constantly wanting more. And so that is part of the conversation that I think is really missing from all this content that I'm reading on Optimal Finance Daily. Every other article is you have to reduce your expenses. Stop spending money on this. Stop buying the coffee every day. Bring your lunch to work. Buy a cheaper car, right? And those are the actions you need to take in order to reduce your expenses. But if you don't change the underlying desires and you're using willpower to reduce your expenses, that is not going to be sustainable over the long term. I think you need to have a very deep shift in your desires so that spending less is sustainable. So I'll give you an example. I bought my car. It's a 2010 Mazda 3 for $6,000 cash. I love that car. I don't desire a Tesla. And I didn't not buy a Tesla because I can't afford it or because I don't want to spend the money or because I'm participating in delayed gratification. I didn't buy a Tesla because I don't want a Tesla. And that to me is the crux of reducing your expenses. Is if you want what you have and you have what you want and you remove this desire for more and fancier and bigger, it is a very intentional pushback on our cultural conditioning.
There's so many nuggets of wisdom in what you just said. And I even just think personally, like Mike, I think you were almost like born this way. I always joke of he just doesn't desire things, which is, I don't want to say you don't desire things. You have a very, I don't know how would you describe it?
I'm not sure what point you're trying to make. Are you going to criticize me here?
No, my point is she's right. It's a huge insight of just the comment about kind of changing your underlying desires and that's what gets you to this point and being happy and not feeling like it's deprivation. Because everybody could get to this point. Some people are going to feel like it's deprivation. I think the three of us having this conversation would never call it deprivation because we're in touch with what makes us happy and what we want in this world. And it drives me crazy. Like having, to be clear, having kids does not drive me crazy. But when I am out with my kids, the amount of influences, like your comment about how we're conditioned since birth to be consumers and desire luxury and nice things. I see it happening with my kids, right? Because when I'm the only influence around them, they're not born that way, right? Yeah. They are conditioned, to use your word, because of all of the ads that are around them, because of what they see their friends doing, because of, because I can't walk through Target and not see, 100 different things merchandised to them. And it's hard to kind of operate in that world and try to even raise kids in that world because you're trying to teach them what you've learned in your, mid to late 30s or, some point later in your life.
So Maggie, I think what you were trying to say was that I don't desire a lot of things that other people normally desire. But to clarify, there are things that I greatly desire and I spend money on them because they align with my values. So Diana, you don't desire cars and that's great. I am in that camp as well. What do you desire and spend money on, though?
Human connection. I think I just spent $2,500 to buy tickets to every Camp FI event this year. That's great. Do you guys know Camp FI?
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. I just went to the first one in Florida. You know what's crazy about that is I laughed harder during that weekend. Like I laughed so hard I gave myself a headache. The people that you meet at these camps are just incredible. And I kind of compare it to this vacation that I took this past April with my Midwestern gentleman. We went on this luxury vacation to the Grand Canyon in Sedona. And I had never taken an expensive vacation my whole life. I mean, I walked the Camino, but that was like $6,000 over the course of 2 months. This vacation to the Grand Canyon was $4,000 in 1 week. It was so outside my normal spending, but I justified it as like, I didn't have a lot of mental bandwidth to plan something more resourceful. I just wanted to go. And I thought, whatever, let's just do it. Let's throw caution to the wind and just do it. And the value that I got out of that $4,000 wasn't that great, right? I spent $450 on a ticket to Camp FI, which is all inclusive and includes your lodging, your food. I spent $170 on a plane ticket. And then there were no other costs when I got there. That long weekend was far superior than the Grand Canyon trip because it was the quality of the people.
Yeah.
Right. Not so much the accommodations and the food and all of that. It's the connection with other human beings that to me is like, I will spend a shit ton of money on that.
Yeah.
But I will not want to spend money on a luxury vacation like that Grand Canyon trip again. But I needed to do it to kind of learn the lesson. Right. So when people talk about like, oh, I shouldn't have spent that money, I'm glad I spent that money because I'll always make more money. But now I have more information about what I value and what is worth it to me to spend money on.
Yeah. It's a bit of test and learn. And
Oh, yeah.
You try it out. See how you feel. Okay. So speaking of Campfi, you actually yourself created this and launched and ideated and everything else, this event called Economy. Can you give us a sense of, what inspired you to create that and just tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah. So after I got out of 30 grand of debt in 11 months and, I got myself to the 60% savings rate and I kind of hit this inflection point where I think some people on the path to FI hit this. I think the general rule of thumb is get that savings rate as high as possible. Right. And I could have gone that route. I could have put my head down and say, okay, I'm at 60% savings rate. How do I get to 70? But that question, how do I get to 70 was less interesting than the question, what do I want to do with my time? Who do I want to spend it with? And what do I want to create? And so I started to ask those questions, which are to me are much bigger questions. And what I realized is I want to surround myself with like-minded people. I want community. I'm a very extroverted person. And so Mr. Money Mustache, who at the time was my idol, he spoke at this event called World Domination Summit, which sounds crazy. Like it's like produced by Pinky and the Brain or something, right?
I've actually been to World Domination Summit before.
It's amazing. Right. And so I went for the first time, I want to say probably, it was 2016. 2016, I went for the first time and I left that event feeling like my life was so full of possibility. I was surrounded by all these growth mindset people that were doing incredible things with their lives. And it was so much inspiration. And I was very impressed by the production value of the whole event. There was just something about it that left me with this feeling of, I want to do amazing things with my life. And so when I started continuing to ask myself these questions, like, what do I want to create? I decided I wanted to create something like that, like World Domination Summit, but very specific to the topic of money. And I want people to leave my event with that same feeling that I got from World Domination Summit, but about money. I wanted them to feel like their life was full of possibility if they could just figure out this very important resource. And so that's the inspiration behind it. I also saw a huge opportunity in that, yes, there's Camp FIs, there's Camp Mustache. FinCon isn't really comparable because FinCon is created for financial media people. It's more of a business to business conference. I wanted to create something for the end user, for the people listening to these podcasts, reading the blogs, reading the books. That's that I wanted to create something for them. And so this event is really about community and inspiration. And it's been a wild ride. I mean, I've been working on this since the summer of 2018, and I've had 2 events thus far in the middle of a pandemic. Don't ask me how I dodged those bullets, but they worked. And, it's something that I'm really proud of, that I get to look at it and say, I created something I want to see in the world. And that to me is the power of having financial stability, is the ability to create what you want to see in the world.
So you mentioned community.
Mm-hmm.
In one of your talks at Economy, you had the line, FI is better with friends.
Oh, yeah.
And Maggie and I definitely subscribe to this, but I'm interested in your perspective on how community, I hear what you're saying about community and friends making things more enjoyable and giving, like providing value to your life. How does community and friends help you on your path to financial independence? How does it help you grow?
The people around us, for better or for worse, influence us. They just do. So if you are surrounded by people who want to buy the new Tesla or who are drowning in debt or who do not ask themselves these bigger questions of life, despite how much you push against it, it's going to influence you. It's going to influence your desires, right? I think it's so important to surround yourself by people that inspire you. It makes the journey easier because it's almost like by osmosis, you get better with your finances. You know what I mean? Like I'm surrounded by people that are have a lot more money than I do and that are more frugal than me and that have more autonomy over their time than I do. And it inspires me to follow in their footsteps. So like, for example, one of my best friends today, I met at Economy, and she's a local Cincinnati woman. She quit her job when she reached CoastFi 2 years before I met her. And when I was looking at quitting my job, she was in this very unique position to coach me because she had already done this. She had already run her numbers. She had already figured out how to make it work. So I didn't have to figure this out from scratch. I had someone who had a blueprint that could coach me through it. That's the power of being surrounded by people in this community. I think that it has drastically improved my path to FI, not only from, the social aspect, because we as humans, we're social creatures. That's just a given, right? But also to be able to have reassurances that there are other people that are comfortable talking about money. I have people reviewing my spreadsheets and my numbers all the time to get that reassurance from other really brilliant people in the community that know more than me on many topics. I just was at Camp FI and I'm sitting in a session about asset allocation and drawdown strategies, as well as tax optimization. And about half of the people in that room were already FI and they were actively drawing down from their portfolios. And it was amazing to get so much knowledge that, like, yes, I could have read a book. I could have researched it myself, but to hear it directly from people that are already doing it in person, hearing this, I mean, it's just incredibly helpful.
It's so interesting. And one of the, as you were talking about that, I was thinking like, it's like positive peer pressure, right?
Yeah.
It's a good kind of pressure you want, and that you want, children and adults to have to push them in a good direction or a positive direction, which is different for everybody on, what positive means.
Yeah. And I would also say like there's some criticism I saw on Reddit, like someone was asking about these events and people on Reddit were like, why would you spend money on that? But I would say like, yes, we do talk about money probably half the time. But if you have an interest in this incredible resource of your finances and you're comfortable talking about that, you're probably comfortable talking about other taboo subjects. You probably have growth mindset around a lot of things in life. So like I have a notebook filled with all this stuff that I want to do for my health. I talked to someone about like intimacy coaching while I was there. I mean, there was like a broad range of topics that we talked about beyond just money. It's almost that money is like this common interest that brings us together, but it's like a tipping point to all of these other interests that we have in common. So don't think that going to a FI-oriented event is 100% talking about money, because it is absolutely not. That's just the crux of what brings us together.
Speaking of kind of bringing everyone together, so back to your conference, and we can mix this question in with Economy and Camp FI and other events you've been to. What are some of the, biggest and best lessons that you have learned that were new to you from being around all of these amazing creators in the finance space that you've gotten kind of the behind the scenes view of with Economy, and then also just hearing, what's said on the main stage?
I would say that there's no one right way to do this. Right? Like if you only expose yourself to what you see online and like the most popular bloggers and podcasts, you kind of get this impression that there is a blueprint or a template or there's a way to do this. But when you actually meet people who are doing this, who are not blogging about it and who are not trying to play the game of the SEO algorithm or the social media algorithm, and they're not going for clicks, right? And they're not going for likes, you get a much more expanded viewpoint of how diverse this community actually is, and that there is no one right path. there is only your right path. And you can't copy what anyone else is doing. You can only get inspiration and ideas around what other people are doing. Because I truly believe that each person has a very unique set of circumstances, preferences, and skills that can be leveraged in different ways to chart your path to FI. If you don't expose yourself to that, you get this sense that there's a right way to do it, that I should be trying to do it as quickly as possible, that I should increase my savings rate, and that I should try to reach this goal by 30 or 40 years old. That is kind of the overwhelming influence that you see online. And you do not get that at all at these events.
And I think one interesting add-on to that is that I think people who come across the standard FI type message, but they are later in life or something just does not apply to their life, it can be a deterrent from them from trying to pursue this. And it sounds like what you're saying is that by engaging in communities where you have all these diverse opinions and lifestyles and decisions, you can find inspiration for almost any unique life that you're living.
100%.
Mm-hmm. And when you're hearing something different that is different than the way you live, you immediately start to feel defensive, which is a normal human emotion. Mm-hmm. And so you poke holes in, right? You hear and you're like, well, I've got kids. That person is a, dual income, no kids, whatever. And so that's not going to work for me, right? You're looking for excuses. And I think, your point is a really important one around just there is no one path, right? And everyone's different. And that's the spirit of life, right? We're all different. We all have, different needs, and what we value is different. And that's okay. That's what makes this such a, interesting and rich world.
And that's what makes it enjoyable. Like I have a unique story because I wrote my own story, right? And I think we're all writing our own story. Like I would never want to tell someone, do what I did, because then I'm robbing them of the joy of writing their own story. And I would never want to do that because it's fun as hell.
Yeah. And you're still writing your own story, right? You can rewrite it 20 more times if you want to.
Exactly.
Diana, this has been a fascinating conversation. I was literally trying to write down so many nuggets of things you were saying while you were talking that I quit at some point and was like, we'll catch them all later, because I think there's so many just amazing nuggets and pieces of advice for everyone, wrapped up with an amazing finish of life's different for everybody, right? So there is not one path, which I think is a great way to culminate this discussion. So if people are interested in learning more about you or economy or whatever, where should they go?
Yeah. So you can go to economyconference.com. And like you said, economy has a strange spelling. So it's spelled at the end with an M-E instead of an M-Y. As you can see from the spelling of my first name, I think I just enjoy misspelled words. So economyconference.com, there you can sign up for my mailing list. And that way you'll be notified when I start confirming speakers for the next event. The next event is tentatively scheduled for March 2023. So, we're over a year out, but I've already sold some pre-sale tickets. Early bird tickets are going to open up in March, and I am very much anticipating selling out based on just the response that I've already gotten. So definitely keep your eye out for that. You can also listen to me every single day talking about, reading these articles on my podcast, Optimal Finance Daily. And so this is a show where I am reading you articles from personal finance bloggers in 10 minutes or less. And I like to say that these bloggers wrote these incredible songs and I get to perform the covers. So you can listen to that every single day, Optimal Finance Daily. And if you are curious about some of the speeches from previous events, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, Economy Conference, and you can watch all the speeches from the last two events. I make that available for free, just like TED Talks. So go check that out.
I'm glad you mentioned YouTube, because I was about to say it if you didn't, because it's not until March 2023, which I pretty much promise you, Mike and I will be there, by the way. We were excited. I wanted to come this year, but I had a trip planned with one of my kids the weekend it was. And you will get first slating in March of 2023. I'm just going to block the entire month since I don't know when it is yet, but but a great way to experience that party about money, right? That you describe the event is to watch some of those videos, because I think you get a really good feel for just the vibe of the conference. And it's great that you make those available to everybody.
Awesome.
Well, cool. We really appreciate you coming on and just thank you so much. I know your time is valuable and we appreciate you taking some time to chat with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me. This was really fun. I mean, it's my favorite thing to talk about. So always happy to hop on and have a chat.
Yeah. And by the way, there's been no kitten activity behind you.
I know. I'm surprised.
Your training is working.
I'm a little disappointed. I was hoping to see you squirt them with the little the water bottle.
Well, it's funny. I was just hoping to see some cute kittens. Mike wants to see you squirt them.
They're usually trying to like climb into my lap. I think it's nap time for them right now.
Thank you so much and have a great day, Diana.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thanks everybody for listening. If you've been challenged or inspired by what you've heard, please rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode.
If you have any thoughts or questions, we always love to hear from you, and you can leave us a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370, or you can also hit us up on Instagram.